So we're going to look at theories of adult learning today and putting them into practice. And I wanted to let you know that the whole time that I am facilitating today, that we're facilitating, we didn't dream up the ways we facilitate. Sometimes we learn how to facilitate a class based on who taught us in the past, right? That's kind of the default mode. Most of your faculty probably do it that way. But there are a lot of resources, and in education, obviously, you know that there's pedagogies and there's a method to these things. And this thing called liberating structures is a toolbox of facilitation approaches. They're not exclusive to teaching. I use them in teaching. I use them to run meetings, to facilitate focus groups, and they're free. They're available. They give you the step-by-step instructions on how to do them. So I've integrated them into today's presentation. So all of the things that we're doing that are active learning are based on liberating structures. And we also drew from a spring 2018 workshop from CERTL that we used to be a member of at UTEP, called the College Classroom. And so I want to acknowledge that resource because a lot of the information on theory is coming from an evidence-based teaching workshop. So we're going to start with our first liberating structure or active learning structure. Your goal here is to answer 2 questions in pairs, and you will each have 90 seconds for a total of 3 minutes. So the 2 questions are, what is an entry-level undergraduate course you'd be interested in teaching and why? And what is the biggest challenge you've experienced while teaching or concern you have about teaching if you haven't been really teaching? So some of you might be teaching right now. Who's teaching right now? Or peer leading or, okay, so, and then the rest of you are looking forward to teaching, correct? So what do you think is the biggest challenge either you've had or are having, or the concern you have when you're thinking forward to teaching? Okay. So without disclosing anything personal or that a person wouldn't want you to share, what did you hear was the biggest challenge that people are experiencing or things that they are concerned about related to teaching? What came up?
Being prepared for lecture.
Being prepared for lecture, okay? And what does that mean? Does that mean just like what aspect of being prepared? Like
I think it's having enough time prior to class to
Oh.
gather as much information as possible
okay.
and not just go over the material that's going to be teach, but also research about other things that you can give us examples.
I see. Okay. So having time to prepare for class. Okay. Others? Yes.
Someone said that they just kind of like talking in front of the class, public speaking, like
Yes.
I guess like nerves over being the only person talking for an hour or
Yes.
however long.
Yes. That's real. Absolutely. Others? Yes.
Creating a syllabus for the class. Oh, creating a syllabus.
Like knowing where to start and all of that. Okay. Great.
Expansive knowledge.
Expansive knowledge.
Yeah, so you can ask a question and also need an audience.
Oh, that never happened. Okay, not knowing the answer. Others, yes.
Like I don't know how to engage with the students and to talk and don't be nervous.
Okay.
For me, just the opposite. I love like talking to students and I really love the classes, but sometimes it's too much. So the knowledge actually the class is lost because I like always like
You wanna
talking
talk.
about things and not like actually giving the knowledge or we can like start a discussion. So
Yes.
you start talking, it's like, oh, that's so interesting. And after 1 hour, it's like,
You
oh my
lose,
God,
you go off.
we haven't like done what we have done.
Okay, so going off, off topic or off of the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, that's never happened to me either. Like, he's been in my class, so. Any others? Anything sticky that's like, this seems very delicate or
Communication.
communication?
You know, knowing when the audience is actually absorbing or relating it
Oh.
to something that they already know.
So how do you know that they are grasping or engaging or learning, actual learning? That's a great. How do you know?
Also language,
Language, what about language?
if your first language is in English.
Okay. Language.
Or like for me, like the program I'm in is bilingual and I need to speak in Spanish. And I'm not easy fluent in Spanish.
Mhm. Yes, that can also be nerve-wracking and truly an obstacle. Okay. Anything else?
I think I just want to portray from the man
Yes,
because of my accent.
accent, yeah.
I need to repeat
Mhm.
as much as possible, even after the explanation. The
Yeah.
slide, I need to go to individual groups in
Yeah.
order to make sure that they really understand what I've explained earlier.
Okay,
I need to-
okay.
The accent.
Okay. We're not going to address these just yet. We'll address them towards the end of today's session. But thank you for sharing these concerns and they're very valid and they also help us know where you are. So just a little meta cognition moment. Notice what just happened, right? So first thing I did was have you connect with each other. My assumption there is that it's good for the class to form a learning community. And that takes some of the pressure off of me as your instructor, if I were your instructor, because now you're establishing relationships with each other and you can ask each other questions and you can rely on each other and you can see each other as knowledge makers. So there was a lot there. In the questions that I asked, it wasn't just an icebreaker of what's your favorite color or what's your favorite ride at the amusement park. This is like, why are you here? What is it that you want to teach? And what is a challenge that you're experiencing? That also should help you connect and form a relationship. But as your instructor who has never met you, it gives me a sense of who you are. And that connects to your question about how do you know they're learning? Well, if I come into the classroom and I used to come in this way, right? When I was a TA, I would say, what do I have to teach today based on the textbook, based on what I think students need to learn? That's one aspect. But now I ask, what is our shared purpose? Do the students have the same purpose as I do? And how can we make our purposes joint? And the way we do that is by me getting to know you and what your aspirations are, what your goals are, what your interests are, where you feel a little deficient. Otherwise, I'm just telling you what I know. So that's just to give us a preview of what we'll be discussing. The other thing I want to call your attention to, and maybe you can tell me about this, is that every time you are in a classroom, you have these microstructures present. What did you do when you walked into the room today? Just, I know it sounds obvious, but just tell me, what did you do? You greet people. Why?
Common.
Social
practice.
norm. Yeah. And then walk me through it.
You sign in and
You sign in because you see a sign-in sheet. Those are structures. What else did you do? You find a place to sit, and I don't see anybody sitting on a table or on the floor in this room. I could, as an instructor, arrange the room so that we would sit in a different configuration. I could have moved some of the chairs. I could have had us sitting on the floor somehow. If you found people sitting on the floor, maybe you would join them on the floor.
Mhm.
So we have more power than we think, but we just kind of flow into these structures because they're there. These tables are aligned as rows, so we must sit a certain way. If the tables aren't movable, then we're constrained in a certain way. We have a certain time allocation, and we're always going to have the same people in the class. We have power in the questions or prompts we give students. So questions matter. How you frame something matters. The small things, these are small things. I could have asked you your favorite pie, favorite dessert, or where are you from? But for our purposes today, I'm driven by a sense of what is the purpose of today. And if the purpose of today is for us to go a little bit deeper into what it means to teach at the higher educational level, then I'm gonna shape my questions based on that, but I also want to engage you. And what did you feel? I know I'm not a psychotherapist, there's no judgment here about anything, but what did you feel when you were talking about a challenge? Did that feel good? Like, oh, did it feel a little bit like venting? So it gives you an opportunity to externalize some unease about the subject. So I always like to ask things about what did you understand really well? And then what questions do you still have? Or what are you not feeling so confident about? And that gives you, as a student, I think, you can confirm or not, that sense of I'm here to learn and it's okay for me to have questions. So here is what we're doing right now, right? And there's a certain set of assumptions behind that. I am talking to you. You are somewhat feeding back information to me, but it's based on questions that I ask you. And a lot of times, if I say, who here has a dog? Yeah, okay. Who here likes a teacher? So I could get some feedback that way, but usually it's not super meaningful. It's unidirectional learning. It's called a transmissionist model. So what assumptions do you think this model makes? Who's the most important person in the room? Students? Why? Why instructor? Why students? What makes you say that? Feel free to take a risk. It's not us. We're here to learn. So
I would say instructors is in the model is almost like the kids are empty and they have no knowledge base, and the instructor is giving them all.
okay, that's one way to look at it. Yes. So, and the instructor, there's certain things that connote power in this, like, who has the pointer? Who advances the slides? So that's where I'm going with that. Now, I agree with you that the students are the most important in the room because that's why we're here, right? But there are certain assumptions there. We're gonna do this in pairs, and I want you to think about a time in your life when you learned a lot. Think about a class or could be a course over a semester, or it could be one class, one workshop, where you learned a lot and where you retained the content. And this goes to your question, how do you know people are learning, right? So you're gonna tell a partner the story of that event. When was it? Who was there? What was it for? And you're going to listen to your partners tell a story. The listening is really important because then when you get into a group of 4, you're gonna tell your partner's story. Is that clear? No? So in pairs, I'm gonna tell Lily my best learning experience. Where was it, who was there, etc. And then we're gonna join another group when I call time. And I'm gonna tell Lily's story to the group before. Then she's gonna tell mine. Okay? So go ahead and find a pair, and this time you can be sitting. Find a person and tell them your best learning experience story. And I will tell you when your time is up. I'm gonna give you up to 8 minutes to do this, okay? Notice also I'm telling you how much time you have. I'm not just saying, and right now I'm saying just get into groups. It doesn't have to be someone you don't know. Last time I said microstructures, right? Find somebody you don't know. This time I'm saying find a person. So it's your choice. So go ahead and get into pairs. Okay, so I'm actually going to write down. To me, this is important data, right? And it's a very quick way of picking up information. What did you hear across stories? What are some of the patterns that you noticed? What makes good teaching and learning possible? Let's start with one group, which that group is ready. Yes.
I think listening and participation
Listening by whom?
from the advisor or
Okay, so the instructor listen.
Also participation in engagement, making class or
And is engaging. Okay, all right. And what do you need to be engaging? What does engaging look like? Dialogue. So it's not a unidirectional, there's a dialogue. Okay, so it's engaging. There is dialogue. What else does it look like? What else do you see in that class interaction?
Humor,
Humor. Huh,
passion,
passion. Okay. Anything else?
expertise,
Expertise.
willingness to learn.
Willingness to learn from the students or the instructor?
Relatability.
Availability of whom?
Relatability.
Oh, relatability of whom?
The instructor needs to be,
What is it?
Right.
What does a relatable instructor look like?
that would have, I guess that would imply knowing the students.
Ah, okay.
And so,
How do you know the students? How do you know that I know the students?
I guess there's different ways.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's important because the things you have here, they go back to the earlier comment of, I don't like to talk a lot in public versus I can't stop talking in public. I'm a very funny person. I'm not a very funny person. I have a Mexican accent. I have an African accent. We are all, there's a place where we are all different, right? And so some of us are going to rely more on humor. That's actually funny. Some of us will try. You've had the faculty, right, that try to be funny and then you're like, oh. But hey, they're trying, right? And then you have people who don't enunciate or speak out to the group. And there's a lot of, in this field, there's a lot of introverts because we like to drill down into issues in books and labs and petri dishes, and we go deep and we like the quiet, but a lot of them are passionate and that counteracts that introversion. So if you're feeling like I'm scared because I'm an introvert, counteract that with passion. If you're feeling like I talk a lot, balance that with expertise and dialogue and ensuring that you're not the only one talking. So this is a lot about finding your own voice in teaching And that's very similar to finding your voice when you do. When you're giving a presentation, when you're speaking at a meeting, when you're as a student participating in class, you can also modulate these things. So it's a lot about self-awareness and self-regulation. What else do you have? These are great insights. Anything else? Anything different? And we'll make these slides available so that you can return to them.
What I noticed is that, my partner, she also watched movies, like,
Okay.
for the class, like, and I had that in common with her in the class that I think I watched some movies.
Why are movies helpful? What kind of movies? Documentaries?
Meals, the Matrix, and Transcendence.
Oh, well, Matrix. Okay, so tell me about why that's helpful.
It's a different medium to see the subject material. It's visual and auditory versus reading a book, which can be kind of
Yes.
not engaging.
Okay, that's the key here is awareness of different learning styles. And that also helps us self-regulate because this is no longer about what I like to do as an instructor, but it's about how do I make sure that the students are connecting with the material in the best way possible through repetition that doesn't get boring. So there's a tenuous line. And movies provide a visual and audio outlet. They also, if they're documentaries, they provide hopefully factual reporting. But if they are not, they provide metaphor, which, so if I tell you that I ate a sandwich yesterday at the airport and it felt like sandpaper in my mouth. Do you get what that means? Versus if I say the bread was hard. No, it was sandpaper. My mouth is like injured. Right? So metaphor helps convey ideas in a way that other people can grasp because we can all relate to a certain thing. So these are great insights. So movies, what are other ways to cater to different learning styles?
Practice. Sorry.
Oh, yes, practice. So hands-on practice. What else? What are you gonna say?
Comparing to something in nature.
Comparing it to something.
In science or there's some abstract thing.
Comparisons to nature, culture, community.
Yeah.
So to help people relate, to meet them where they are.
We do a lot of workshops in creative writing where we give constructive feedback to all the creative students.
Okay, so workshops with feedback, establishing feedback loops so that you know how you're doing. And that's also a part of, you've all had, and I've had, and I've been maybe sometimes the faculty member who takes forever giving feedback or returning grades. And you're sitting there like, oh my God. Okay, did I do it right? Did I not do it right? Am I in the right? Am I on the right track? That feedback provides reassurance. So that's also important. So communication. So that would be a third thing, right? Communication. What would we call this? What kind of communication would it be? Consistent, constant, or open communication?
Would I also like this exegesis?
Exegesis?
It's like a close reading of a book and you read one sentence and you're like, what is the narrative technique here?
Okay, so going through things together, the step-by-step. Okay. I mean, exegesis tends to be a text-based.
DES.
But you get the idea, step-by-step run-throughs of things. Okay, is there anything else, anything missing here that we need to add on the slide?
Something new is gamification.
Oh, yeah, that's true, gamification. And some faculty will do that where they give you a clicker option on your cell phone, or they'll make something into a game.
There's Kahoots, there's Minecraft.
Kahoot.
I've never heard of it.
No, I haven't. I'm a little getting to the, I passed the.
It's
tipping point.
online, so you join on your phone or your computer and like has this really annoying sound. And you're just like, and it gets faster and faster.
Oh, so it's. And mix that up, right? Because some people are really gonna like that, and then other people are gonna be nervous by it. So then a little bit of note taking is okay. Right now I'm lecturing, right? And we're doing the lecture thing. It's not to say that lecturing is not appropriate. It's to say, mix it up a bit to keep in mind that not everybody is always going to connect with a lecture, and that we connect to things to different extents. Okay, anything missing here that we need to add before we move on? Yes.
From this group, I think that stood out were, what's called approachability. There were a lot of authoritative figures mentioned that didn't make it easy, even sometimes possible to approach, to get the feedback, or to expand them.
And what are some things that show you that someone is not approachable?
I guess what the figures are.
Professor with a big ego.
Oh, that happens also a lot. We have to, yes.
Professor that is very important.
Oh,
Their field.
yes,
And-
yes. I know a few.
The professor make a wall.
Yes.
And feel like confident to
Yes.
approach.
And that goes with what you're saying of open communication. So I had a student who was a PhD, graduated with her PhD in rhetoric and writing. And every day she would stand at the door and shake her students' hands as they came in and greeted them. It was free, no cost solution, and her students felt welcomed by her and like, hey, you matter. Hi, you're here. I acknowledge your presence. The small things sometimes that make a big difference with approachability. How do you know? Do you have an example of a faculty member who is approachable? What do you see in them? What are they doing?
Say your name.
They know your name. Okay. It's important. Oh.
No pressure.
Why is food a thing? What makes them feel approachable though?
They recognize that it's a 3-hour class and that you're gonna feel hungry in 3 hours. One time, one lecture, he went to go straight out 3 hours without taking out the cookies, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I was just so hoping the club and I forgot about the cookies, and no one said anything."
Cookies, a bag of chocolates, it doesn't have to be something huge. So approachability doesn't mean no boundaries. Boundaries are super important, but a small gesture, yes.
For example, that the professor knows like the personal interests of the somebody can say different names, but you know that this person like loves this approach to the subject. So it's like, okay, I know that you like this, so you know.
Exactly. So making a connection to that, and you can also send an email, hey, I saw this conference, you might be interested in it, or here's a publication you might be interested in. So knowing names, personal interest.
I have
Yes.
something that I went to school like half the time in the pandemic and Zoom, and it was a much different dynamic.
Yes.
And I found that the people in my program, we would talk before class started on Zoom. But all the psychology classes, like the one psychology class I took on Zoom, nobody said anything, and it was just like a completely different atmosphere. Like, I felt like they were just waiting for class to start, and I didn't like that.
So there's a little bit of personal conversations before.
Before and after class. Yeah.
And that's easy, that's free too. Or music, right? You could also have music playing on Zoom
Yeah,
while people are walking in. Or whatever, chime, whatever. Okay, this is excellent. If it's okay with you, I'll move on. Yes, okay. Switch. So this is excellent, you all. So you have a sense of what makes a good instructor. And I think these are essentials. These are kind of like minimum specifications. So this is what the theory says. This is the lecture part. And don't ever put this much text on a slide. It's wrong. You should not do this. But I highlighted in orange the parts that are more important. I just wanted to show you that there's a bigger context for them. We talked a little bit, just a tad, about the knowledge transmission model, unidirectional. I have the knowledge, you all are vessels, and hopefully you're empty so I can fill you with all my knowledge, my big ego, although I do know some things, I have some expertise. I'm not gonna, but that can be shown in other ways. So sometimes I lecture, sometimes I don't. You have a choice. It doesn't always have to be a lecture. Okay. The other thing here is, so when we lecture, the number of responses from students, the dialogue tends to be minimal. And I don't know if you're making a grocery list in your head or thinking about lunch or worried about your daughter or your dog or your grandmother. We don't know if learning is happening when we're lecturing, because then we have to quiz them. That's how we know. Okay. What lecturers forget sometimes is that, and you have some very effective lecturers, right? Who use humor, who use passion, they just draw you in. That's wonderful. But you don't have to be that magical character as a teacher. You can be engaging in other ways. So the National Academies of Science and Mason. Science now, medicine, I don't know, but okay. The National Academies tell us that learning is contextual. So it depends on your motivations, your prior knowledge, your experiences, your language and cognitive skills. And if you speak a different language or know a different language, even if it's a computer language, that you have a second window or a third window to the world. You see the world through different lenses. And so you do, and I do. So I also bring biases as an instructor. And it's important, back to self-awareness and self-regulation. It's important for me to be aware of my biases. It's not just racial, social biases. Sometimes it's a bias of visual learning, because I'm a visual learner, or a bias of being an introvert or an extrovert, or being nervous about certain content. So the idea here is it's important to recognize that we are all part of something bigger. And actually, I want to show you a different slide. It might be too far. Okay. Got too carried away. Sometimes PowerPoint is too linear for me. So some of you who's in science and engineering here, and very, what you would consider a very heavy content area. Okay. You might be wondering, yes, this is great, connecting with people. People have cultures and languages, but I have content and I have a semester to make sure my students learn. Okay. Memorization is one way to learn. So yes, people will rely on their memory to learn facts, but they won't know what the facts are for if they don't apply them. So there has to be a mix of connecting to prior knowledge, to giving them cues for recalling information. So there's different ways to use memory learning. And constructivist learning theory says that you store things in your long-term memory. Short-term, a lot of us can do. We can spit something back out short-term and then forget it. But it has to do with making connections with existing memories. And so how you memorize, if you're going to have students memorize, how you have them memorize is important. I know you're trying to catch the text. We can send you the slides. Just I see you. So if their initial understanding of a subject is not engaged, they may fail to grasp new concepts. I think I failed to grasp an entire year of physics in high school because I was just like, disconnect. I'm like, I can't connect to this. I never engaged. Today, as a grown woman, I think I could sit in a physics class and learn it. But at that moment, I wasn't. So sometimes it's also about the moment when you're sitting in a class. So the important thing here is remind students that they're learning and that they need to make connections, and remind yourself that people have to engage in metacognition, learning about learning, monitoring, back to self-awareness. How am I learning? How well am I learning? Do I need help learning a certain thing? Yes.
Would you say that if you're a good student, you make a good instructor, or that's not necessarily the case?
No, not necessarily the case, because some, well, I don't know. No. Not necessarily, because you could be a really good student and internalize a lot of things, but have some trouble externalizing them and connecting, helping people connect. So what makes a good instructor are the things that we talked about before. Right? So here's an example of the memory, how memory works. Okay, so take a look at this. Some of you will be able to do this because you think this way. Okay, so this is the learning system that you have to learn. There might be a pattern there. So you see 1 equals nothing. You got the idea here? Okay. So take a look. Give you a minute or two to learn. You can use your pen for this next part. What is this number? Got it? Anybody got it? No? Yeah, it's because it's kind of hard to do things like that, right? So here's another way. Are you familiar with this type of grid? Whether if you've played tic-tac-toe or if you've seen a calculator or a telephone pad, then you can start to see here is a pattern, right? So this is how the code is written, which tells you if you have to now figure out what this number is, and you draw the grid. So why don't you draw the grid on a piece of paper near you and see if you can figure out the number. And I'm going to get you next. Can I advance? Okay. So this is the number. Now try it. Jesse's doing it by memory. You're gonna have to tell me what the answer is. What is the answer? Did some of you get it? Do you have a number? Okay. What did y'all get?
314,158.
Okay. You get the idea here? I gave you an abstract new code to learn, and you could have figured out a way. The second time I gave you an abstract code connected to something you know, a telephone dial pad or a tic-tac-toe grid. that makes a difference. So when we're teaching, even if we're asking students to memorize, even if we have rocket science content, we have to have a shared purpose. I have to connect with you. You might know about my big ego and all of my great projects, but I also need to know about your interests and what you know and how to relate to you. So the idea here is that it's important to have a deep foundation of factual knowledge, but those facts are better learned if they are contextualized. So as a faculty member and an instructor, you can help students organize that knowledge in ways that facilitate retrieval for them. Not for you, if you're a German professor and can relate to the German hillside and blah, blah, blah. I had a student once present so he put a picture of a building in Paris on the slide, and he said, what building is this? Nobody here had been to Paris or remotely near it, and they felt dumb. They didn't, so that didn't connect. So maybe use a building that's local that people would know about. So that's where I'm going with all of this. So the assumptions of a constructivist learning theory versus a transmissionist learning theory are that the learner is in a unique cultural milieu, or cultural environment, and they will be motivated by making connections. Also, the participant in the class is a knowledge maker and a contributor. They don't come as empty vessels. And active learning is preferable because it gives you more opportunities to contextualize and to connect. And if one of those ways is to connect in a relational way to other people in the class, leverage that. Otherwise, why are we all in the same room? Why isn't the class online asynchronous? You can access the content, you can take the quizzes, you can do the things. But if we're all in the same room, or if we're all in the same Zoom room, what can we do to maximize our time and our relationships? And the teacher is also part of a context. So all of us have a context. This has the arrows, as you were all saying, in dialogue. There are two-way arrows instead of one-way arrows. So my goal as a teacher is to primarily facilitate or coach. And leave my ego aside. And that moment when I don't know the answer becomes not a problem. It becomes a moment of, I don't know the answer. Let's look it up. Who does somebody in here? I've had many times when the students know the answer, especially if it's like, what is the time period of the Renaissance? I teach it every year in 1500s-ish. I'm not very good with those details, and somebody in my class always is. So why not? Well, I'm good at what I'm good at, though. So remember also, you're going to have an expertise and you're going to be good at it. So it's okay for other people to be good at other things. Okay, and the structures. So another reminder: time, space, configuration, group configuration, how much time you give people for things. Did you have more clarity when I said, if I had said, find a person and discuss this for some time? Okay, we don't know how much time. We might have a minute, we might have an hour, we don't. Find a person, any person. But if I say find someone you don't know, find somebody who you've already worked with, find somebody who has the same interest as you, find somebody who has a different interest, it changes the dynamic and what you're able to do with what you're learning. So proponents of constructivist theories, you might have heard of some of them. So I didn't, this isn't just like, this is like a liberal arts, because I teach in the English department. So you might have an idea that, an English teacher, they all hold hands and sing or whatever we do, I don't know. This is, you know, a good substantial list of theorists and the National Academies of Science, whatever else, endorse this way of learning. So I don't know where we are with time. I want to make sure that I'm respectful and have Jesse.
11:20.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick feedback on your most pressing concerns, and then Jesse's also gonna give us some pointers about classroom management. So let's see, from these, we have things that you've mentioned earlier today that you're concerned about. You have being prepared for a lecture or for class, afraid of public speaking, creating a syllabus, not knowing the answer, going off topic or agenda. How do you know when students are learning? And what do I do if I have an accent or my speaking is not as clear to people in the room? Any other concerns that you can think about right now that came up that you want to nominate? We'll talk about a few of those. Which one do you want to talk about?
Well, I was gonna say, traumatic experiences, because I was teaching in high school. And, it was when the violence got really bad a couple months ago. And there was hardly any.
In class?
And I was like, what's going on? And I had been so busy developing the classroom content, I hadn't even kept up with the news.
Okay,
And so all of a sudden the students were like, no, this is what's going on. And
okay,
then when those kids slowly started coming back, some of them were not interested in classroom. They had
Yeah.
So how do we address that?
You know, that's a great question. And I think we addressed many of these. We didn't address how to create a syllabus, but maybe we could have a follow-up workshop that does that. But that one, are you all interested in what would be some ideas? Or maybe do you have some ideas about how to address that? When there is, and this, the last few years, I mean, we've had the August 3rd shootings here in El Paso. We've had COVID, the pandemic. We've had various situations on the border that violence, fear, different things that don't allow people to be fully as engaged so what are some things that you have seen that are helpful? Seen faculty do? Or what are some ideas that you have about that? I'm interested in your. Yes.
I think just when the lockdown and like online classes started disappearing, and it was like one of the first classes I had like presentially. I would really have to engage with the students because they were not afraid, but yes, they wanted to, like, they didn't have like this routine of going to university. They were like in first years, and yeah. And one of the things that it was nice, it was like to encourage them to, after the class, go and get something nice together after the class, like taking a coffee and speaking about the class or about their personal life, so they could meet each other. Because one of the things that happened with COVID is that they didn't know the colleagues,
Yes.
the other students. And I think that was nice because there was not like the obligation of my class, but also like this amusement afterwards.
Okay, yes, just having fun together.
Yeah. So like,
Why is that important? I mean, I asked our staff, like, is it important to you to celebrate people's birthdays at the office? Cake, is it important for us to celebrate Halloween, the month of September, whatever you want? Why do you care? That's just like, you know, you bring a cake. We're talking about food. Why is that important? And is that my responsibility as an instructor? My ego is like, hey, I'm a rocket scientist. Do I have to worry about your problems outside? Sometimes it could be, you know, violence affecting you. Sometimes it could be that you had a family member pass away or something happen in your family. Why is that? Is it the instructor's responsibility to care about that or to even address it? You were gonna say something.
I think it's very, very important to create some kind of bond
Mhm.
in order to pass knowledge across. So all the Halloween fun time,
Yeah.
creates that barrier in between student-instructor relationship,
Yes.
so that you have better bonding. If your students have great bond with you as an instructor, it's easy for them to understand what you're passing across as a teacher.
Do others agree with that or? And it functions in a way similar to REST. As a graduate student, you have so much to do and of different types of responsibilities and a lot to manage. And sometimes it can be hard to give yourself a break because you're thinking, I'm just gonna push through. I'm just gonna do this one more hour. I'm just gonna do it tonight, just this time. But the fact is that if you were to go take a walk, you would return to this more refreshed and with a better mindset. So there's this thing called the law of diminishing returns in economics. And there's a moment where pushing through actually diminishes the returns that your body and your mind can offer, what you're doing. So you're doing yourself a disservice by not stopping. And similarly with students, you might feel like, I have all this content prepared. They need to learn it. They have a test on X day. We have to get through the content. We have to get through the content. Yes, but if your students are not in a psychological place to receive the content, to understand it, to connect with it, you are basically spinning wheels. Maybe one or two will get it, but it might be more of a waste of time. So it might be a better investment just for the moment to pause, acknowledge, and then move on. It seems counterintuitive because we function in such a different, like, especially if you're here, if you're in graduate school, you have achieved. You're an achiever of some kind, and you do that by being disciplined and by doing all the things you're supposed to do. So it feels like I should be doing. Sometimes the pause is the best investment. I had a hand here, and then we can go back to.
So I just want to say that if you're in the sentence, acknowledgement is crucial to the student feeling accepted. I know when I started in class this semester, I felt like every comment of mine was just immediately dismissed and not acknowledged, and I felt like I was at odds with the professor, and it was like I didn't want to speak up anymore. But then like something changed in like the third class where he started to be more open to what I had to say. Maybe what I was saying was different, but you know, it wasn't. I didn't feel like this combative nature that I felt in the first two classes.
And that comes back to this notion of boundaries, right? So sometimes as an instructor, you'll have a student who you feel is always, ooh, here he goes again. We're gonna have to, there's ways to curb that, but part of curbing that is allowing them, giving them the floor for saying, okay, tell me what you're gonna say, but also I have a boundary for you. Hey, let's pick this conversation back up after class. Let's save that for another, think about this in a different way. Because we also have things to get back to. So, I mean, this doesn't mean flexibility is not like run over me and let's just throw everything, let's waste the whole class period. It's okay, we acknowledge, but then the boundary is now we're going to pick things back. And yes,
That's the way I addressed it was when the kids came back, like I went and I switched the content on them. And of course, they're like, you know, in the room and nobody learned anything. And so by the second day they come back, I went in and I said, okay, you guys, that's it. What's going on? What's wrong? Like, how is everyone doing? And I actually wasted that whole day on all my classes, just having that dialogue back and forth. And then that following day, you know, they were on track, learning again.
oh, so they got back on track because
Yeah,
you said you wasted the day, so, okay.
Was that the students will talk about everything to everybody. All the other and everything like that. But I actually had a teacher that came up to me and said, you wasted your whole yesterday just talking to the kids and you're not supposed to.
Oh,
So that's where I was like, okay,
Well-
well, am I in the wrong? Was I in the right? Like, I think I was right because in the end, the kids went back to learning.
yeah.
But at the same time, I had administration getting on my back because I'm not doing content related.
And you will also have people who say that this approachability thing doesn't matter and that you shouldn't smile in class and, so self-awareness. Who are you and how do you balance things? You do have to have content and you do have to have discipline and we need all of these things. But it's not either or. And I'm gonna give Jesse the floor. So you all have been excellent. Jesse is gonna take over and then we'll continue the conversations.
I actually love to give you some feedback and validation on that. I actually love your approach on that. I want to challenge your verbiage a bit by saying you wasted the day serving those students. Because I want you to use more empowering language for yourself on what you did. What you did is amazing, whether your administration likes it or not. Your time is never wasted when you're serving your students well, right? And if they're not in a space to learn, and these are high school students, right?
Yeah.
Even more so, these are young individuals experiencing sometimes a traumatic world. Taking a day to help them process that in a shared space that they may not have anywhere else with their peers is incredibly important. And so your day was not wasted. Your day may have had more impact on those young minds than the subsequent weeks or whatever else happened in that day. And they have to find a space to process their world. There's a reason if you do like a history course or something like that, you do current events. It's important. And so I love your approach. I want to challenge your verbiage and how you think of it for yourself of that day wasted, because that was a day empowering, not a day wasting. That was a day processing and supporting your students, not a day wasting. So there's been a lot of good conversation today, a lot of good dialogue. We talked about theory. We're going to go over and talk about classroom management and a little bit rubber meets the road and some things that actually Dr. Dura has been role modeling here. We're going to talk about, but to get us in that mindset, I want to take just a moment and do a thought exercise that I enjoyed doing. I want you to think about just for a minute, and then we're going to shout it out a couple ideas. What could you do to ensure your own failure in overseeing a classroom?
You are reading it correctly.
What could you do? Walk in and be like, if I do those things, I'm guaranteed to fail.
How do we mess this up?
What could you do? Shout it out.
Overstructured.
Overstructure. Good.
Show up late.
Show up late. Absolutely. What else?
Read off the PowerPoint.
Read off the PowerPoint. Call that death by PowerPoint, right? Yeah. What else? What can you do to ensure failure? Dismiss the student's question. I'm not going to answer that. That's not very good.
Yeah.
What else? Demean your students. Yeah, not using technology, not being comfortable to learn new technology. Maybe like, I know that I've got a PowerPoint, but here's a transparency slide.
Not reading their papers before class.
Yeah, not reading, not being prepared, right? What else did you do? Come on, think about it. Shout it out. Maybe one word, one or two more.
Just speaking like yourself. Just speaking, not living like.
Yeah, not encouraging participation, coming up to the front, lecturing, being the person to pour the knowledge in, and then walking up, right? These are things that we know we could do that would ensure our failure. Now, how many times have you witnessed someone instructing you and doing exactly those things? Raise your hand. Right? Those examples probably came from our experiences, right? More of a rhetorical, reflective question. How many times have you been in a class or a group or some kind of leadership situation where you've done those things? Rhetorical. You guys should be want to. So we know that sometimes there's bad practices, but it can be hard for us to break out of those mindsets, right? There's a reason why sometimes people gravitate towards those things, towards a comfort or a lack of training or lack of awareness, lack of time, to fall into some bad habits. And so we need to interrogate that a little bit and think about, am I doing some things that I know are just not great practice? And how do I try to break that cycle? Okay. So I'm going to talk and just going to share some quick things that you can do in a practical sense that can help you with your classroom management. A lot of what we talked about today has been from the mindset of the productive classroom, right? The engaged students. However, are students always productive and engaged? No. Even at the college level, you'll have disruptive students. You'll have disengaged students. And if you're not affecting your class management, that will increase. And so how do we do that? There's a couple things that we can do. One is really working on moving around the classroom, right? We spend a lot of time at the front of the classroom today because we're recording to make sure sound is heard, right? And I'm trying to project so that we have a good recording. But there's nothing that says in a classroom like this that I have to present from the front of the room. I can be back here and present just as effectively. Actually, if I wasn't presenting and recording, and a lot of things if I was doing in classroom, I would prefer to present back here. Focus your attention up front gives me access to my slides. I never have to turn sideways to view my content. If I'm at the back, I like to walk around if I can. Use proximity. This is particularly effective if you have folks that are not as engaged with your classroom, right? So if you know you have a student that spends a lot of his time on his laptop and you're not sure he's taking notes, you move about the space and you don't make them feel uncomfortable, right? Of always being by them. But if by virtue of your proximity, you can see what they're doing, they will engage in your classroom, right? If they're on their phone and they're texting, but you're not even look at it, just move out the space. Use your room. That proximity will solve that problem without ever having to even really confront the student, right? You see him nodding off, you know. Again, you don't know what's going on in the student's life. Sometimes the student may fall asleep in your classroom and your first reaction is to get upset, right? What has happened in that student's life? Are they sleeping in their car? Did they get here at 5:30 to get parking? Right? Or did they pull an all-nighter? Who knows? Or just tired and the content isn't resonating, so they're falling asleep, right? When you go around the room, you're less likely to fall asleep in class, right? If you do know somebody falling asleep, I encourage you not to get hostile in that, but also follow the student math, like we'll get to why in the next slide. But how are you doing? Are you okay? Right? Your first instinct when you see this type of behavior shouldn't be they're disrespectful. It's what's going on with the student? How can I help so they can be more successful in the classroom, right? So use your movement around the room so you can see what's going on. Also work on stopping your off-task behavior by engaging the student. If you're in a more of a lecture environment or even a class dialogue and you notice that some students are not as engaged with what you're doing, ask them a question, right? And not a gotcha question. Just pull them into the conversation, right? You see a student that's maybe texting on their phone, or they got their laptop out at a time where it doesn't seem to make sense. You assume that they may be either working on an assignment for the class, scrolling through Amazon, on Reddit, whatever they're doing, it's not here with me. And so I'm gonna ask them a question about that. Not about their content, but ask them a question what we're talking about. You know, what do you think about this point that was brought up by another student? Pull them in, show them their value, right? Now, again, they may get a little embarrassed. They'll fumble through an answer, give them some space to do that. But then hopefully they'll pick up on the cues that, hey, you got to be paying attention because I'm going to call on you, right? So use engagement with them to stop the disengaged behaviors, okay? If it's persistent and ongoing, you can ask them, can you please put the laptop away, right? Don't make it a big production. Just ask them nicely, right? Use that. Also encourage folks to really be genuine in the classroom. Be your authentic self, right? Now, it takes some time to figure out what that is. What are your body movements and motions as you move through a classroom? You notice that how I move around the classroom and how I gesture when I am instructing is going to be different than what Dr. Dura is going to do, Dr. Connolly would do, what Ray would do in the back when he's teaching 1301 UNIV, right? How we gesture, how we move through things is going to be different. So find your authentic self, maybe role model from things, but then find yourself in your space in the room. This will also help with your public speaking, right? As you find that comfort of who you are. But then use that genuineness and that connection to get them to be engaged versus like sarcastic side of things, right? The example I've used, like when you see a student, they're like, the text in class, you know what I mean? And call them out like, oh, what's going on tonight? Heading to a party? Is that going to be effective at getting the student engaged in your class? No, all you did is embarrass them, right? For the rest of the class, they're just going to be frustrated, right? And they're going to talk to you about you to their peers afterwards. Can you believe they did that, right? You might have lost that student for the semester just by embarrassing them for their classmates, right? So don't use sarcasm, be genuine with them. Use that engaged relationship to get them to engage with you. Make sure you also model the good behaviors. We talked about things we can do to ensure our own failure, right? So model the good behaviors. You need to be on time for your class. And if your class starts, at 9 a.m., 8:59 is not on time. Because you don't have time to come in, get anything you haven't made set up for PowerPoint set up, right? Get your class arranged. Make sure that they're in the trash left by a previous class. Get there a bit early. Push in the chairs, organize things. You want to be spaces to walk in as much as you're able to, knowing that you all are very busy, right? Sometimes you can't get there until right before your class. But make sure you're on time. Make sure you're modeling that behavior, that what you want the students to do in the room, you're doing. If you show up as the class is starting, you have no right to expect your students will be arriving early and ready to go at the jump. So you have to model the behavior. So whatever it is that you feel you want in your classroom, do that for the students. Another example of that might be, you're there early, things are set up, and our first inclination because of smartphones is that we'll be on our phone, right? If you don't want your students to come in, sit down, and then just engage with their phone until you start your class, don't be on your phone yourself. Talk to your students. Get them engaged even prior to this. Helps you build that relationship. So that way, they won't be on the phone when you start. They'll model that behavior. Also a good idea to just kind of keep a running log of both positive and negative behaviors. And it can be very easy for us to gravitate to and only think about the negative behaviors, the time someone isn't engaging, underperforming, or disruptive. And then you leave your high performers off to the side. Noting the behaviors gives you an idea of what's happening in your class. And I recommend actually keeping a log of this if you can get to that level of commitment, to know what's happening with your students and see changes in behaviors. But also really help when a semester or two after you taught a stellar student, they come back to you and say, would you write me a letter of recommendation? And your thought process is, oh crud. I vaguely remember them. I've taught a lot of students since then. Can I help them still, right? You can go back and review like, oh yeah, I remember, I have these touchstones, right? It will make you more effective and it'll help you later on with doing those other recommendations. So I recommend doing that. And then make sure you're addressing major or chronic issues outside the classroom with the student from a place of care, right? And so if you have a student that is regularly argumentative in class discussion, and it's disruptive, it's damaging other students' knowledge acquisition. Okay, talk to that student, ask them to call in the office hours, sit down with them, share a cup of coffee and say, hey, what's happening? This is my observation. Student one may not realize they're being that argumentative, right? And so holding up the mirror may give them an understanding of how you're actually supposed to participate in a dialogue. Or there may be something underneath the surface that you're not addressing you can assist with. If it's an engagement issue, you can talk to the student and ask, why is this a persistent issue? Right? You can get to the underlying cause, hopefully, and seek a resolution, right? But you can't be afraid to talk to the student about it. I also want to take a moment to talk about problematic and troubling behaviors. Yes, it's a little surprised this didn't pop up on our immediate concern list, but does anyone have any concerns about what to do if you have a student that starts displaying troubling, concerning, aberrant behavior in your classroom, right? Do you have concerns about that? Maybe yes, maybe no. Does anyone know what to do? Students start talking about suicide in your classroom. What do you do? Something to look. Oh my God, right? Student starts, who is normally like on a very even keel, really engaged, starts coming in and starts sharing the things that make you concerned that they're having a psychotic break, right? They're talking about hearing their mother's voice come out of the TV at night in our class discussion. Something is going on. Interesting fact about brain development, right around that 18 to 25-year age is where schizophrenia usually starts to manifest. Not always. But for a lot of folks, it can onset really later in life. No context on what's happening to them in that moment, right? This is an interesting time where you might see things just pop up. because we're in the last phase of brain development, right? The development of consequence. So you need to know what to do if you have troubling and concerning behaviors. So first, we have to figure out what qualifies as troubling or concerning behaviors. What would you describe as troubling? Is self-harm, would you describe that as troubling, or is that like an area of concern?
What do you see, like, cuts on the arms?
I would put that in the, I appreciate you asking. That's something you can definitely observe. I put that into the area of concern, right? And when I put troubling, concern, troubling is like, yeah, something's going on there. I need to talk to the student. Concerning is, I need to tell somebody and the student needs immediate assistance, right? What other things? So yeah, yes, that definitely falls in that category. What else can be troubling and concerning?
If the student is participating in class, when you check the attendance and all of this stuff.
Yes. They're always in class and then suddenly they're not. They miss an entire week. Yeah, that is very concerning. What else? Yeah, changes in performance. They're not doing as well as they used to. Something doesn't seem right. They were really good standing out student, all of a sudden the performance is dipping. They seem less engaged. What else? Yeah, really argumentative, very challenging, which can sometimes just be a personality, and sometimes an indicator of something not going right. What else?
If they talk about not wanting to live anymore, or
Yes. And displaying any behaviors of heavy concern. They're displaying any behaviors that might indicate suicidal ideation, right? Which they're often uncomfortable to talk about and uncomfortable to address. Because that's a scary topic, right? So one of the things that I did in previous institutions and previous areas, I was a suicide prevention trainer, right? I'd often train students and staff on how to recognize the behaviors or the warning signs of suicidal ideation, and then what to do in intervening, right? Demystifying them. I'm not going to give you the full QPR training today, but what I'll tell you is that the warning signs are pretty consistent. Asking someone about suicide does not put the idea in their head. It is incredibly important to actually address the situation with them. And that the follow-up on that is actually not scary at all. You report it. That's it. Tell the appropriate people so that they can take action. Because you are not a clinician. You're not a support person like that. So you question, persuade, refer. Ask them how they're doing, persuade them to seek resources, submit a referral.
To where? Oh,
Yeah, that's next. I got you. QPR. That's 2 hours of training in 30 seconds. QPR. Do those things, right? So the things you can do is you notice these different varying troubling and concerning behaviors. Depending on how level of severity, you can progress through a list. The first thing, unless it's an immediate concern, is talk to your instructor of record for your class, right? Someone's in class and they're slipping academically, right? They're usually very on time and then they've missed 2 classes straight. The students become very argumentative. Talk to your instructor of record, seek a consultation. How do I address them? What advice do you give? Share your observations. Hopefully they can help you understand what you should do next. There's your point person. If you have an issue with a student that is either displaying issues with academic dishonesty, right? They're cheating on something, or they're violating student code of conduct. They're harassing their student in class, being disruptive, like anything that's in our student code of conduct. You can submit a referral to the Office of Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution, OSCR. And I'll show you where that referral is, right? So then at the next level, you go for the instructor of record, and this may be in a conversation of like, hey, I have this concern, maybe it's about academics, maybe it's about behavior in class, and then they give you the next thing is you're referring them to OSCR, and then they will handle it from there. There's also the Counseling and Psychological Services Office, CAPS, on our office. They provide both ongoing mental health counseling and crisis counseling. If you have a student in the class, maybe you observe self-harm indicators for the student, but you don't have a direct concern that they are going to make an attempt for suicide. And again, self-harm and suicide, completely different things. Right? Which is also when you ask somebody who may be suicidal, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Is not the same question as, are you considering suicide? Because I'm considering suicide is not seen as harm, it's seen as solution, it's seen as problem solving in a very negative way. Self-harm is usually as a way of relieving anxiety or stressors, right? But you observe.
Yeah, I was gonna say something.
That's a great question. That's probably going to be down here at this one, depending on how they behave in the classroom, right? But yeah, you said there's immediate need that we got to do something, right? Depending on the level of intoxication, that could be a referral to Oscar, it could be UTEP, depending on what you observe. So you have a student that comes in, and then you notice it seems like there are fresh, like cut marks on their arm. You may pull that student aside, talk with them, see how they're doing, find out that they have a history of self-harm behaviors for stress relief, and they've been engaging in it again. And then you might help try to get them to talk to CAPS. They'll get support and services so they can find a better way to help with that, right? Or you have a student that is sharing in a creative writing class and they submit a writing that heavily focuses on depression and sadness. And we pull them aside and say, let's talk about this piece. It's really powerful. But I'm a little concerned how much of you are in this story. And that's why I've actually experiencing a lot of these things. Oh, well, let's talk about maybe going to CAPS. I don't have immediate concern for this person's safety, but I know they need something more than I can provide. You can get them to talk to CAPS. There's also these student behavior intervention teams. So you have something that rises above that level where you feel like this needs to be reported. Student behavior intervention team is a group on campus that reviews reports submitted for students that are displaying troubling, concerning, aberrant behaviors, determines a risk level, and assigns them a case manager. Now, there's a lot of folks on these different, committees, different levels and areas. For the graduate school, Dr. Connolly serves on the SBIT committee doing the evaluations, and I serve on the case managers committee. So if a graduate student comes through and is evaluated depending on risk level, they get assigned to me to come and try to figure out how can we best serve them, right? A fair amount of referrals that come through SBIT are displayed on like classroom behavior, like stopping into an office and kind of like it's kind of throwing a fit, like something's wrong, they're really agitated, right? They're really aggressive, or a lot by email. We see that a lot where there's an email where they get submitted where interactions normal, interactions normal, interactions normal, and then bam, wall of text. The student unloads all these things that are going on, and then in this wall of text, like there's a lot happening. They told me they're homeless, they're had self-harm issues, they have recent death in their family, they feel no one supports them. Those can be submitted to SBIT, right? Doesn't mean that my hands are washed, but then you get them that connection, right? I'm going to show you what that looks like because I want you to see these things. This is the SBIT link here, and it talks about what are concerning behaviors. So it clarifies this. It talks about resources and shows how to report and how to make a referral. This is the SBIT Behavior Intervention Team website right now. When you go, the link, kind of like the jumping point just before this on the student's website, also has a students of concern tab that they're developing, right? So I'm showing you the SBIT. So if you have a student concern, you can work through this. Now, again, I recommend talk to the instructor of record and get advice, but also don't hesitate and sit on these referrals, right? 2 weeks out from receiving a concerning email, you submit it. It's too late, right? Get it to us soon so that we can make the action and try to assist the student. There's also this link here for reporting. So I talk about submitting a report. If you go to utep.edu/report, it takes you to this page. This is where you can submit all of the reports and it clarifies what types there are. So if you have an instance where you know that 2 students copied each other's work and then submitted it. Academic dishonesty submitted right there through a Maxium. Maxium is our tracking database for this, for all of these. There is student of concern here that defines how you can use that. There's general misconduct. There's a space for the students to submit an appeal. There is sexual harassment and Title IX referral here. There's also university withdrawal, but that's more for the student side. Okay. So in submitting reports and referrals, this is the space to do it. There's also the Title IX office. And so if you observe any behaviors that are sexual assault related, or you do something reported to you that's sexual assault, harassment, stalking, dating violence related, you are mandated reporters and you have to report that. Telling your instructor of record is not filing a report. You have to tell Title IX. And you cannot assume your instructor of record will. What I encourage you to do, because again, this is a very complex topic, go to a Title IX training. They've posted them all on Campus Edge. And this is one of the things that is vitally important. Because of Texas law, employees can be held not only employment related, held accountable by employment, but legally responsible for failing to report a Title IX incident. Right? And the student coming and telling you and disclosing that 3 years ago they were sexually assaulted is a Title IX related incident you have to report. So make sure you know how to do that and how to file those reports. Finally, there's the police department. If you're in a situation where you believe there's an immediate threat to yourself, your class, or the student, you need to call the police right then and there and notify them so they can come in and they can address that situation. If you are talking with a student and you are concerned that if you leave them alone, they are going to make an attempt on their life, you need to call the police so that they can intervene and protect that person. That student might not like that. They may resent you for that. Again, almost 15 years of doing suicide prevention, I will tell you 100% of the time, I would rather someone resent me for the rest of their life than they be dead. And that's what it comes down to sometimes. You have these barriers on the mind. Also, if you have a student that's coming in that appears heavily intoxicated or under the influence of marijuana or something like that, depending on what is going on with that student, PD may be your call, right? Student comes in, they smell of marijuana. Are they disruptive or a harm to themselves? No, you don't need to call the police, but you need to talk to the student and let them know you're submitting a conduct report to the Office of Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution because that person will apply on campus, right? Student comes in and they're heavily intoxicated and obviously going to not be able to care for themselves. You need to call the police because they could leave your classroom, get in the car, and get in the car wreck. Right? So you have to make good determinations in those environments about what to do. Right? But in your gut, if you have a situation where you're like, I'm not sure, I kind of feel like maybe I should go to one of these steps, the answer is do it. Right? I kind of feel like I need to submit an SBIT form. You're going to need to do it now. I kind of feel like I should call the police. You need to call the police. Right? If you're kind of, that means you're scared of what might happen next, but you need to do it. Make sense? Questions about this? I know we're finishing on some heavy stuff. But it's really important, right? You're going to be there, you're working with students. You need to know what you have at your disposal, knowing that you're not alone to deal with all this yourself, right? And you will interact with students that are going to be in troubling places, students of concern, dealing with a lot of traumas. It's how do you do that? What are the things you have at your resources? You don't have to feel like I'm the only one that is addressing this with these students. There's a lot more you have access to on this campus. All right. Pass it back.
All right, well, we are at time. Thank you, Jesse, so much. And if you have questions or ideas for future workshops, we're happy to continue the conversation. It doesn't have to end here. You can also contact us. You get on the graduate school website, staff, and you can make an appointment with one of us to talk about some of these things further. We'd be happy to talk one-on-one or to create a follow-up workshop for you all or for your program. Okay, so thank you for being here. That's my email if you need to copy that down. And I didn't put Jesse's, but Jesse's is on the side. We're on the website.
Email gradsupport@utep.edu if you have any questions.
And again, if you are the structure that we use to manage our group activities today, liberatingstructures.com, to find a variety of ways to engage groups and facilitate. So thank you all for being here, for your time and energy. You had excellent insights and questions.
Thank you, doctors.
Um,